Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome in to a Monday afternoon edition of Establish a Show. Usually we are here for a showdown style breakdown for you, but once again, 2 weeks in a row, weeks 2 and 3, the NFL gods have blessed us. Maybe blessed us. I think the games tonight are better than last week, but blessed us with 2 Monday night games. So we're going to be breaking down this 2-game slate for you all. I am Gary Hartman, joined, of course, by the one, the only, the very successful since preseason, Cody Main. Cody, how you doing?
Yeah, have been on a bit of a wild run, and we were just kind of talking off air. And sorry for the issues. No tech lording issues today after the tech lord issues that struck right before lock. Unfortunately, we seem to be doing well in that department. But yeah, we were just talking off air that since like the start of August, really since like week 1 of the preseason, it's kind of been this nice little run for me specifically, and kind of spiking these small 5-figure scores every week has been quite the nice run for me over the last month or so. Obviously, yesterday was a great day for the entire ETR family. Drew Binkmeyer, as he's being called in chat now, Drew Binkmeyer, pops for 370K last yesterday, and Wiggins gets one of his own for 100K on FanDuel. So it was really great slate. I felt like we had a pretty good read on it. Felt like you had a pretty good read on it with what you discussed in your content throughout the week, and the guys on ETM and ETS did as well. Hopefully we can carry that momentum into this 2-game slate. The last 2-game slate was quite disastrous. I have a lot higher hopes and expectations for the skill position players on this slate. It's a very exciting slate, and I'm pretty excited to break it down.
Yeah, let's talk quickly about what we saw last week. We talked a little bit about what 2-game slates could look like. But last week and kind of what we had seen in the past. I still hope by Thanksgiving to have some data on these smaller 2-3 game slates, and we'll really be able to break it down on a leverage article. But last week we left like $4,600 on the table in the DraftKings Optimal. We did see representation from all 4 teams. We had a double Brown stack with Jerome Ford and Amari Cooper was optimal. We had 3 Saints, Tony Jones, Olave, and Taysom Hill. And then we had George Pickens and the Steelers defense on the other side of the quarterback. So, weird things like that can happen on these 2-game slates. And Adam Thielen was a one-off for the Panthers. But I do think more often than not, you're probably going to see representation from all 4 teams, but I don't think that's a guarantee. And we kind of talked about how last year on the week 2 Monday night, it was really all from 2 teams. So we'll talk it through. I think this one is interesting. All 4 offenses, you can make a case, have some firepower to them. So we'll break that down here. Anything stand out to you macro-wise before we kind of jump into the state of quarterback here?
Yeah, I think that last point that you mentioned will be the biggest difference from this slate to the last slate. And look, I mean, it's good to have that extra data point, and it just kind of reinforces our opinions that you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable when you build on these 2-game slates, and specifically for Showdown, you need to be very uncomfortable when you get to the point where you're building. But I think it just reinforces the idea that you can get weird and still create plus EV teams. And I know a lot of stuff happened in last week's slate from an injury perspective that kind of changed the outlook of that slate.
Yeah.
But this slate is different in the sense that I think all 4 of these offenses, while maybe not collectively inspiring on maybe the Buccaneers side and maybe a little bit less on the Rams side, they have pieces that we can get excited about from a volume perspective, from a DFS upside perspective. So I do think where onslaughts were much more interesting to me last week, if you just got the one offense that happened to spike, I think this week I will still have some of those teams that are heavily involved in the Eagles and heavily involved in the Bengals. But I think you're going to see representation from the Rams, from the Buccaneers to some degree, just because of how much firepower they have at the skill position options. And so I think just generally speaking, I'm going to have less of those onslaught style builds this weekend.
Yeah. And then from a salary perspective, I don't expect, and again, you mentioned the Chubb injury and the injuries that we saw last week that impacted things, but I don't expect to leave as much money on the table tonight. We'll kind of talk about that as we go through here. Some questions in chat about where to find things on site regarding tonight's information. I wanted to hit on that before we go. So what you see on screen is the 2-game projections. If you go in the drop down, that's under projections Monday 2-game slate. So if you're looking to reference for the main 2-game slate, which DraftKings does have a $500,000 prize up top for the 2-gamer, then obviously there are going to be 2 showdown slates for you. The main one, the flagship, if you will, is going to be the late game, which is Rams Bengals. I believe DraftKings has a 200K prize for that. Cody has the full showdown breakdown here for you. If we have time at the end of the show, we're going to touch on this quickly, kind of the same way we would for other showdown shows in a much abbreviated version. That's there in your normal place for showdown. And then there's also a single projection page for the Eagles Bucs game for Monday Night Showdown. Just projections. Cody used his hard work on the main showdown slate for the breakdown. So that is everything you need for tonight. We're going to go through this slate from the 2-game perspective, and we'll go from there. So let's start with quarterback, Cody. Jalen Hurts, who was a lot of people's QB1 heading into this season, is on this slate. Does, from an eye test perspective, or just not eye test, from a, glancing at the screen perspective, his salary is much higher than everyone else's. His projection is much higher than everyone else's. You would think normally maybe Joe Burrow's situation would be a little bit closer, but we don't know what to expect from Joe Burrow tonight. Sounds like he's going to give it a go to play, but I am a little bit hesitant about playing him. I guess tell me about your Hurts thoughts, and then anywhere else you want to go on quarterback with Burrow or anything else.
Yeah, quarterback's going to be really interesting tonight, and credit to DraftKings. I think they did a good enough job with the pricing, even given all of the uncertainties about Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense, to kind of at least spread out the ownership on this slate. And I was worried that we might see a ton of Jalen Hurts ownership. If it holds at 36.7%, I still think he's the best quarterback play on the slate, even where he's $1,400 more expensive than Burrow, even where he's 15 to 20% more owned than the other quarterback plays on the slate. I just think look at that ceiling column. He clears Burrow by 9 points. He clears the other two quarterbacks by 12 points. My only concern is that the field will feel the same way that I do about Jalen Hurts, and suddenly we're not looking at 36.7% in tournaments. We're looking at something like 45 or 50%. And at that point, he becomes a slightly less attractive option. Still think probably close to the best quarterback play on the slate, but in those circumstances, you're looking at really low ownership for Baker Mayfield, really low ownership for Matthew Stafford. And then we have no idea what the field's going to do with Joe Burrow. From a straight math perspective, the ownership is spitting out right around 20%. But like you said, I think there might be enough concern about not only just his ability to finish this game, but his ability to run, certainly his ability to even plant effectively and get the ball out to his receivers. So I think at 6,600, where he's $1,000 more expensive than Matthew Stafford in the same game environment, I think he might end up being a little bit underplayed. And if that's the case, and we fear that maybe Jalen Hurts pushes up a little bit in terms of ownership, I think Burrow, I would be willing to take some chances on him becoming a little bit closer to his normal self. Obviously, I have serious concerns about that calf injury, and it sounds like he was a legitimate questionable, doubtful heading into Sunday until he got a practice in with the first team. But I would like to take shots on maybe him being a little bit closer to his normal self. And if that's the case, I think we could see a really nice game from him, and he could be one of the top options at quarterback. So I like Hurts, of course. I just hope everyone doesn't agree with me in liking Hurts, and that maybe the 8K price tag keeps his ownership down a little bit. And if I fear that Hurts is going to push up a little bit, then I don't mind going to Joe Burrow and just banking on him being a little bit past that calf injury.
Yeah, I think the market is baking in Joe Burrow not being 100%, because I think this game is only, a 43 over under. And in theory, from what you've seen out of the Rams offense, it's the way Stafford's looked at it the first couple of weeks, the ability to push. If the Bengals were 100%, that would be a much tastier environment, one that we could think could possibly go back and forth. Burrow is definitely worth a shot in large field tournaments. I mean, we're looking at only 2 games. Keep an eye. I mean, right now we're projecting him in. Sounds like he's pushing to go. It sounds like Glazer thinks he's going to go. That usually is kind of where we trust our information. But it's a risk. It's a risk for sure. And so that kind of leads me to that middle tier of these other 2 guys, because if Burrow's going to get steamed down, which pushes Jalen Hurts steamed up a little bit, we got these 2 guys in the middle that seem pretty interesting to me. I mean, very impressed so far with Baker Mayfield and how he's looked for this Buccaneers offense. And the Eagles have been, susceptible to the pass through 2 weeks so far this year. Certainly not the same vaunted defense that we saw last year. And Matthew Stafford, I mentioned, kind of a renaissance year for him. Obviously, everything that's going on with Puka Nacua and kind of, the firepower we've seen out of the surprising firepower we've seen out of the Rams offense, Khyren Williams and everything. We'll get to all those guys. But do you have a preference between these 2 guys that are pretty much identical salary, identical projection, nearly identical ownership? Ceiling projection is 0.2 off. So really similar plays here in Baker Mayfield and Matthew Stafford.
Doesn't this just feel like, and I hate to get into these types of narrative-y based discussions, but doesn't this just feel like a spot where Baker falls flat on his face after kind
Yeah,
of
it does. It
putting it
definitely
on the
does.
Vikings, putting it on the Bears defense that we just saw give up 1 billion points to Patrick Mahomes? It just feels like now in prime time, uh, against this Eagles defense that, yes, is not nearly as vaunted as they have been. They're missing Avonte Maddox. They're missing Nakobe Dean in the middle. It just, to me, with the way this defensive front is playing, with the way that they can get pressure on the quarterback, it just seems to me like one of those spots where it's like, okay, yeah, he's still Baker Mayfield. But maybe that's a little bit too narrative based. I think at 20% from kind of more of like looking at the sim analysis on this 2-game slate, I think at 20% he's closer to efficiently owned or maybe even slightly over owned. But that's where we get into that discussion that if we think Jalen Hurts might push up, if Burrow's going to stick around 20-ish%, I think looking at these two options where they're very similarly projected in referring to Baker Mayfield and Matthew Stafford, I think people might just prefer the game environment that Matthew Stafford is in. People are really obsessed with Puka Nacua at the moment. And I think that makes a very clear single stack option right there. And I think people are less concerned about the Bengals defense. So if I had to guess of any of these quarterbacks that's going to get squeezed down, it seems like it would be Baker. But it's one of those things that's like, prove it to me at this point right now, where I would much rather just play the other 3 quarterbacks on the slate. And if Baker's the guy that beats me against this Eagles defense, then so be it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I might be a little bit more bullish than you, just in the hey, this connection with Mike Evans seems real. Just to get this report that Bradbury's moving into the slot tonight to follow Godwin around. So I kind of like that Baker Evans stack, and bring back kind of if you wanted to get away from Hurts but still get exposure to that game being the one. If you want to paint the story that hey, Burrow's not 100%, they're going to really try to game manage. Since he's playing with desperation, they might try to slow this game down. That's why we see that 43 over under. But you don't want to pay 8K for Hurts, but you want to squeeze as many of those superstars in that game in as you can. I think Baker's pretty efficient where he is. But yes, I think that he's got the highest probability. Take Burrow out of the equation because he's kind of his own thing tonight. I think Baker has the highest probability of falling flat on his face for sure. I think they're all intriguing options though. Like I want exposure to all 4. If I was doing a full build, I'd come in probably around the field on all these guys at the very least, take my stance where I want to. But I don't think I'd feel comfortable being significantly under on any of them, where it does sound like you might feel comfortable coming under on Baker there.
Yeah, I think I would be most comfortable coming in under on Baker and just taking shots on his skill position players. You mentioned Mike Evans, who has this massive role, and I'm worried that maybe the field does the same thing too. But I think the one thing that I keep coming back to is how much savings you get from dropping to Jalen Hurts to Baker Mayfield. Because once we get to talking about the skill position players, there's a ton of guys the field and you and I are going to want to play tonight, and you can't play all of them if you're jamming in Jalen Hurts at 8K. There's some ways we can make things fit from a salary perspective, and some spots where we can save. But I think once you look at that salary difference at the quarterback position, those 2 options, Baker and Matt Stafford, might look a little bit more attractive because these skill position players in this slate are we got some studs.
Yeah, for sure. Should note, I think it's going to rain in Tampa tonight. I don't think that matters too much. Still looks like light wind, but scattered rain showers throughout is what I'm seeing right now. Yeah, I don't know. Just take that for what you will. Let's go over to the running back position. And our best value, it looked like on the entire slate, if I recall, I think, is Joe Mixon here. And I think it makes some sense, right? First of all, outside of Aaron Donald, we still don't believe in the talent on this Rams defense, especially in the front 7 at all. I mean, I don't think there's much there. You can make the argument that it's going to be leaned on more if Burrow's not 100%, maybe even in the pass game with checkdowns. The situation behind him right now is not one to be desired. It looks like Khyren Williams has that role right now, but we're projecting Chris Evans in. It's kind of just dart throwy. So Mixon's role, his price, the value score, the ceiling projection, all seems really good to me. How are you handling, or how would you handle Joe Mixon, who's our top value right now? It seems like maybe a cash game lock tonight.
Yep, feels like a cash game lock. Honestly, feels like really good chalk in tournaments too. Even at 65.2%. Again, looking at kind of the sim analysis for this 2-game slate, he appeared in 62.2% of our top 10,000 optimal lineups after running the play-by-play sims, and it feels right. I mean, the role is awesome for Joe Mixon. The spot, you of course wish that Joe Burrow was 100% healthy. You would obviously see a little bit wider spread here as a home favorite, though I still think against this LA defense, he's got a really good shot to just provide a really strong score and a still pretty decent shot to provide a slate winning type score at the running back position. You see, we've got the highest DK ceiling projection on him as well at 31.4%. He's only 6,300, which feels just a touch too light for him. And that's why you see him popping through as our best value. So hate to kind of start off with agreeing with our projections and kind of agreeing with the field in terms of ownership. But I think Jalen Hurts at the quarterback position, probably the best overall play on the slate, even at slate high ownership. Same thing with Joe Mixon at the running back spot. I think even at 65.2%, really, really strong play.
This Khyren Williams thing, 76 of 80 snaps last week. They ship off Cam Akers this week. It's like Ronnie Rivers and rookie Zach Evans. I don't even know if he'll be active behind him. This role seems really, really good. I mentioned the Rams offense kind of, doing better than maybe we projected. And it's really all been on the backs of Puka Nacua and Khyren Williams. 5,700 seems okay. Projecting has a really good value as well. Ceiling projection, not too far off from Mixon. I do prefer Mixon straight up, but, and the ownership's kind of similar to me where I might prefer him quite a bit. But, that difference in $600 might matter quite a bit. And you can play both these guys, obviously. So Khyren is our second best value. And I'm not going in order of price here. We'll talk about Rachaad White in a second. How do you feel about Khyren? I mean, looking pretty good, and the role looks great.
Yeah, the role's sick, and you know me, I'm a sucker for volume, and that's what Khyren Williams' role provides. They feel good enough. This coaching staff in LA feels good enough to go ahead and trade away Cam Akers, and even after being a game day inactive in week 2, we're kind of still projecting a every down bell cow type role for Khyren Williams here in week 3. I think if you wanted to try and paint a bear case for Khyren Williams, it's that the team now has had another week of preparation with a potential RB2/RB3 in place, where it seems unlikely that Khyren Williams would go back to back, just playing like 100% of the team snaps. We might see a little bit of Ronnie Rivers. We might see a little bit of Royce Freeman, who I believe was just called up.
Yeah, they called him
went live. Yep. So I don't expect him to play on 76 of 80 snaps or something like that. Again, I'm sure they'll mix in the Freemans and Ronnie Riverses of the world, but it still seems like a very, very, very secure role for Khyren Williams here. And I agree with you. Although he's $600 cheaper, I think I prefer Joe Mixon straight up. I think it's just a little bit better matchup. You get the guy that's a home favorite in an offense that we expect to at least expect to put up a few more points. So I prefer Mixon straight up, but again, have a tough time saying that Williams is a bad play even at 60.4%. You're just going to have to make some concessions somewhere because you can't play all these high-priced, expensive type guys and fit them into a lineup.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think he's pretty good. So, I mean, if you want to start with those two and probably in cash, you might. Rachaad White is the really interesting name to me. Now, I still, for jury's out on if this guy's any good. I know we have a lot of people behind the scenes at DTR that don't really believe in the talent. I get that. The offensive line, concerning, front seven Eagles talent still there. I could see a game here tonight where, like, finally those Rachaad White pass catching chops that we expected to have out of college are there, and the role still remains really good. I mean, Sean Tucker, undrafted rookie, sitting there behind them, talented guy, but you're getting quite a bit of ownership discount on Khyren and Joe Mixon. He sits there in between their prices. I'm pretty bullish on him on this slate, kind of as maybe a guy that just falls between the cracks a little bit if people are clicking a lot on Mixon and Khyren here.
I think he could end up getting squeezed. He's the first guy that I look at on the slate and think 46.3% is just a touch high for me on Rachaad White. See him landing in our optimal lineups at a closer to like 40% clip. So it's not like it's necessarily bad. It's just that he stands out as slightly maybe overpriced or over-owned relative to the two guys that you see there in the value scores above him. So I don't think he's necessarily a bad play. But like I said, you're going to have to make some decisions at some point in your lineup where you can't just play all of the highest owned guys. And I think for me, Rachaad White would be the first kind of cut. We just saw what this Eagles run defense did against Alexander Mattison. And then Alexander Mattison went out against the Chargers this weekend and had a pretty good game himself there. So I do worry from an efficiency perspective, but 20.5 touches per game through the first two, certainly not bad for Rachaad White. And it seems like just based off of kind of the sentiments, based off of how I'm feeling, if the field is agreeing with me, he might be the guy from this kind of upper 5 to low 6K range that ends up getting squeezed out.
Yeah, I do think if you want to like double Baker, he's definitely in play there. He had 5 catches last week on 5 targets. Possible that they just need to get the ball out quick. Probably Otten Evans would be my favorite double, just because the Eagles are a little bit susceptible against tight ends. But Evans, I think Evans White would be my next favorite. So the most interesting conversation before we kind of have a question on or have a conversation on some of the dart throws is the Eagles situation. So Kenneth Gainwell expected back tonight. It sounded like they wanted to play the hot hand between him and DeAndre Swift, who had the absolute coming out party 10 days ago. If it's hard to imagine the Eagles coaching staff doesn't give him the opportunity to repeat that performance here. But Gainwell was clearly the guy in week one, the alpha. Penny's kind of an afterthought at this point. A lot of ownership on Swift. I don't love the matchup. Again, Bucs still do have a lot of blue chip talent in that front seven, but it's kind of dart throwy, I think, here between Swift and Gainwell. Swift is obviously the guy with a much higher ceiling.
This is a tough one. I think this is a spot that every spot on these small 2-game slates is going to be a make or break spot. You got to get almost everything right, as we saw last week, to really spike for a huge week. But specifically this spot, I think, is going to be very important to get right. What I keep coming back to, and of course, this is going to be influenced by our inputs at ETR, our projection inputs and volume level inputs at ETR. But the thing I keep coming back to is Gainwell is $900 cheaper. And he's, going to be a third as owned, half or a third as owned as DeAndre Swift. A lot of that due to because of what we saw last week with DeAndre Swift. And you're right, based off of what he did in week 2, it's going to be completely hard for Gainwell to ice DeAndre Swift in week 3. But what if this team just goes back to Kenneth Gainwell as the RB1, as they did in week 1, and DeAndre Swift still has some pass pro issues of his own, still didn't show a ton as a receiver last week. So I think maybe this team just goes back to, even if it's a 50-50 split or 60-40 in Gainwell's favor, where he's cheaper and less owned, he's the guy to me that looks like the standout play from this backfield, and a way for us to save a little bit of salary, and for a way for us to get a little bit different in our builds, where he's coming through at just 15.1% projected ownership. The Sims really like it, based off of the difference in ownership and based off of the difference in price tag. But a lot of that, of course, is going to be influenced by what we think of this backfield's projected split.
Yeah, I think that was a really well said way to put it, because as I can't speak myself, I'm fasting, everyone. My brain's at like 50% capacity. So I think Swift gets the opportunity early to repeat what he had, but I do still think if this game's close, and I know a lot of sharp people that were on the Bucs side, 5.5, 6 points, whatever you're able to get it on early in the week. I think gun to Sirianni's head, he trusts Gainwell more, right? And I think that's kind of what the coaching staff was saying in that week 1 performance. And one thing we have still seen from DeAndre Swift now, and we'll see how much weight that week 2 performance carries, because it should carry some. But coaches, just for whatever reason, don't fully trust him. They were playing him by default for the most part in that game, and he sees the opportunity. And I think us as fantasy people have been saying, well, where's this been all along? We know the talent's been there. We don't know what's in the minds of these NFL coaches. So I'm kind of with you. Like, if I'm just looking at salary saving, ownership, all of it, give me Gainwell. But like, let's not kid ourselves that Swift doesn't have, a much higher ceiling here, right? By far the most talented back in that backfield. No reason to go to Penny, but you see obviously negative values of both those guys is kind of eating into each other's upside. If I'm, I don't know what optimizers or percentage are giving you Swift, but Gainwell's the kind of guy that I would probably give a little bit more weight, maybe a thumbs up in the solver too, or something like that.
I would do that. And then also if you're building in the solver, I would provide a doc here. If DeAndre Swift, Kenny Gainwell, I think they're very negatively correlated. If you get that type of big slate winning type score from one of these backs, it's likely because he iced the other one out. Not entirely, but maybe it ends up being like a 70-30 split one way or another. And in those instances, I do not want both backs.
Right. The role is so good for Khyren Mixon that if one of those guys gets in, that probably eats into the other guy enough where you don't want them together. I totally agree with you.
We saw it last week too. Like, you're going to have to deal with the tush push at least once, maybe twice a game. Like, you're going to get the Jalen Hurts rushing touchdown from the 1 yard line. It almost seems inevitable at this point. So you really hope to get there like DeAndre Swift did. He got the touchdowns, of course, but like, he was there on volume. Regardless, he got there on yardage. He hit the 100-yard bonus. You didn't even need the touchdown from him. It was just kind of gratuitous at that point. But yeah, you're dealing with another goal line back essentially with Jalen Hurts there. So I really would certainly not want to play all 3 of them.
Great point. Other guys you could take shots on here because it's such a small slate. So George mentioned Sean Tucker played more last week. He played 23-ish% of snaps. Rachaad White still played 72. If White's being still as inefficient on the ground, maybe you could see that tick up towards 30%. He's a guy you could throw in there. Not a good matchup. 4,100 though. If you're full on 150 MMEing, I wouldn't cut him out. Obviously, all these guys, like if you were playing Khyren Williams, you don't want to play him with Joe Mixon. If you're playing Sean Tucker, you don't want to play him with Rachaad White. If you're playing Ronnie Rivers, you don't want to play him with Khyren Williams. Even on a 2-game slate, these guys are dart throws at best. And, the Mixon, Williams, Rachaad White, and then, of course, Swift and Gainwell. Like that's enough volume and role from those 5 guys that if one of these other dudes are getting here, it's coming at the expense of their starter. Could I be wrong? And can we see a Dolphins thing from yesterday on a main slate? Sure. Anything's possible. But I'd feel pretty comfortable with those rules. Do you disagree with me there?
Agree with you on the rules, and also agree with you on like if you're doing a 150 set, like if you look at the sim results, and a lot of this is just going to be because of the low projections and low prices. But if you look at the sim results, like Sean Tucker's coming through at 3% total ownership. Sims say like playing 7 to 10% or something like that is okay. So if you ended up with like 6 to 8% of Sean Tucker and like 5 to 7% of Travion Williams across to 150 set, it seems okay. You unfortunately you're really hoping for like one of those situations to break where one of these guys gets thrust into a big role, and we're not going to try and project those situations out,
right? Which is what happened last week with Jerome
Ford, what happened last week.
I mean, it's exactly what happened last week.
Yep, it's fantasy football, and it can happen, but those aren't situations we're trying to project for. So I would not try and get carried away as using these guys as means to get unique. We'll talk about the wide receiver and tight end position next. I think there are some cheap punt-y type plays that we can mix in as better ways to get different.
I think that just about does it on running back. I think I just want to ask this question now, though, before we go on, in case we don't get to Showdown. Anything that stands out to you from what running backs you'd let go together, I guess particularly in the late game, but if you have anything on the early game too, because that's always a question we get with Showdown. Question.
Running backs together on the early Showdown slate. I'm more comfortable with like DeAndre Swift, Kenny Gainwell there just because of pricing specific things and because of just the way that those players interact on a single game slate versus a full 2-game slate where you have to fill 3 running back positions specifically. So would be more okay with playing them there. And that assumes that Boston Scott is ruled out, of course, which we're projecting as of right now. And then the same thing for like Khyren Williams and somebody like Ronnie Rivers or Royce Freeman, who I believe is the stone minimum on DraftKings for the 2-game slate. Totally okay with it there because really, at $200, it doesn't take much to force their way into an optimal lineup, particularly if all of those expensive skill guys are getting there and they're necessary parts of winning lineups. So I don't mind doing that over there. It's just a little bit different salary structure and format than the 2-game slate, so it makes more sense there.
Cool. Just in case we didn't get to talk at all, I wanted to touch on that. I know we always get that question. All right, let's go over to receiver. Let's go quickly team by team here. The Bengals stuff, let's touch on quickly. I mean, it's really hard to break this down without knowing the full state of Joe Burrow. My one thought is we're still waiting on the explosion game from Jamar Chase. If this was a normal 2-game slate that Jamar Chase is on the slate and under 8K, I feel like, and what we've seen out of Bengals over the last 3 years, I feel like we'd be getting 50, 60% ownership on Jamar Chase. Here we are getting 40% ownership on Jamar Chase at only 7,800. That's like the kind of thing as a GPP player this early into a season that I just would take shots on in volume and just hope that regardless of whose quarterback talent can win out here. What are your thoughts there? Am I crazy for wanting to like double the field? Not double, but 30% more than the field on Jamar Chase.
Yes. Do not stop at double the field. We're talking 70, 80% Jamar Chase. We've got Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow on an FFPC main event team, a team that we actually went ahead and did the alpha thing, which doesn't look so alpha in hindsight, and took Jamar Chase at the 101.
I don't know if you want to admit this right now.
Over Justin Jefferson.
You can admit it.
So we really
can admit it, but let's just say it was Ryan Reynolds' idea.
Anyway, this is those spots as a GPP player where you're truly in those what do you win when you win type situations that you pray for, because you're right, Jamar Chase at 7,800 on this slate, given some of the value that we're going to talk about in a second here, like Jamar Chase would be and probably should be 60% owned. But we have a hobbled Joe Burrow. We have a 2-week stretch where he's not only just underperforming the box score, but relative to like his normal target share and normal usage profile, he's kind of underperformed in that respect too. I do think the big games are coming, that he's certainly not going to be held under 10 DraftKings points all season. We're going to see him at some point. And there are a few encouraging signs here in his usage profile. He's still tied for the team lead in first read target share. Shout out to Fantasy Points data for that. Those Nuggets, 33.3%. And in design target share, he still leads the team at 29.4%. Those are indications to me that despite the slow start, the team is still trying to get him targets and still trying to scheme him into plus situations. I think that will continue tonight. And this is a Rams secondary that's allowing the league's 5th highest first read target share at 78.7%. I think that Joe Burrow is going to look for him early and often, and kind of as a safety blanket. Like, this is a situation where if you want to make a correlated bet on the Bengals offense overperforming what they've done in the first 2 weeks, and a correlated bet on Joe Burrow being a little bit more healthy than he's shown through the first 2 weeks, then this is the way, man. I mean, you're getting Joe Burrow on a 4-game slate at 20%, maybe less ownership. You're getting Jamar Chase on a 2-game slate at sub 40% ownership. These are the spots that you truly look for. And I want to be way overweight on this Bengals passing attack as a whole, and specifically on Chase and Burrow.
Yeah, and I don't even mind getting heavy on Chase in non-Burrow teams and just in general, because I think there's a world Burrow's hobbled. Sammy's mentioning, whether it's backup quarterback or a hobbled Burrow, kind of scheming up some things to Jamar Chase, right? Get this guy going. He's our best player. Let's get him going. I could see that certainly being the case. Just volume, full point PPR DraftKings. Like, I could see, just breaking a screen to the house or something where I'm comfortable banking on that. And you could see like a 12 for 150 Chase game with Burrow only having, an inefficient 210 yard or whatever, 230 yard and 2 touchdown game. That might not get it done if Hurts is your guy. So I love Jamar Chase. Also, the narrative T. Higgins week last week, obviously there are weeks that both these guys can get there, but I like it being Chase's turn. Charlie asked Bengals alpha doubles. Sure. I think you could certainly go with especially on a 2-game slate here, you could definitely go the Chase Higgins Burrow route. No issues with that whatsoever. Not too much to say on Higgins. Obviously at cost seems like as solid of a play almost as Chase. We know we love the Chase ceiling. Higgins looked good last week. Roll remains really strong. Ownership there seems pretty efficient. Do you have any thoughts on Higgins or Boyd?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said on Higgins. I think ownership there looks pretty efficient. You're of course getting the $1,600 discount off Chase. Higgins still has, massive ceiling. You saw it last week. He put up 28, 29 DraftKings points last week on a massive target share, massive air yard share. He's leading the team in end zone targets. Everything arrow pointing up for T. Higgins. I think if anything though, because of last week, because of the price savings, that maybe ownership not only flips here in some tournaments, but like maybe steams up a little bit in T. Higgins's direction. And I already think he's efficiently owned. If I get the sense that he creeps up, north of 40 because you get that savings off of Chase, then, I just much prefer Chase. Tyler Boyd's fine. The price tag is really awesome, but because the price tag is really awesome, he's coming through with quite a bit of ownership. And we'll talk about some punts that are less attractive from like a DraftKings baseline projection standpoint, but are more attractive from a way to get different on this slate in some offenses that we're not super excited about, the alpha studs. So much prefer Chase, kind of secondarily prefer Higgins. Boyd's fine as a salary relief, but I think at 23 to 25% or whatever, I would just prefer to come in underweight there.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk the other side of this game. I know we kind of started with the late game first, but whatever. Puka Nacua has been the talk of the fantasy world for good reason. I mean, setting all times records. This guy clearly shouldn't have been a 5th-round pick, and I think it's more real than not. Right? Anytime you get this level of targets through your first 2 games, it's more real than not. 6,400 seems also appropriate. You could, based on his first 2 weeks, you make the argument should be even higher.
Yeah,
doesn't look like the field is scared to go there. 54.5% ownership projection seems good. I know we took an over in the prop streets. Puka, man, I mean, it's hard to fully fade, especially if you like that Cincinnati side and you want to bring back. Credit to Tutu Atwell as well. Has been really strong to start the season, but those seem to be the 2 favorite targets for Matthew Stafford. How are you handling Puka Nacua here tonight?
Yeah, 54.5% projected ownership, and at 6,400, it's another spot that feels pretty right. I think if I was building a 150 set tonight, I'd probably come in around 50 to 55, maybe close to 60% on Puka. I think he's relatively efficiently owned, and it's the most obvious and probably the best bring back on the Rams side if I am as interested in the Bengals side as I am. it's tough to poke any holes in Puka Nakua's fantasy armor through 2 weeks. He looks like an absolute alpha. And I made the joke in the Showdown breakdown article that is, it's Cooper Nakua. He's basically stepped into that Cooper Kupp role and has performed just as well from a fantasy perspective as we would expect Cooper Kupp to perform. This is another guy like Jamar Chase that leads his team in first read target share, and the Bengals allow a ton of first read targets on the other side. So it all kind of just points in the same direction for me. The one thing that I'll say about Puka, and part of the reason why I have a little less interest like in the Rams quarterback in Matt Stafford, is Puka's popping a ton in looking at kind of the sim analysis from this 2-game slate. But even in those lineups where Puka is in the optimal, Matthew Stafford only appears at a 19.9% clip. So for me, like this offense is one that I just want to attack from a skill position perspective. I want Puka. I like Khyren. We'll talk about the rest of these wide receivers, but I just have a little bit less interest in running it with the quarterback as a stack. I'm totally cool with running out Puka by himself.
Yeah, it's kind of why I think I'm a little bit more interested in Baker than Stafford. You just really need to be sure that Burrow is himself and the Bengals can put up points for Stafford to get there. Because what do you need from Stafford? You need 350 in 3 or 4, right? From a pocket quarterback, especially with the ceiling that Hurts has, potentially Burrow. So it's a little bit riskier. So Puka does seem like a better one-off play. I would probably come in around the field on Stafford still, just because I think that's within the range. We saw how weird the 2-game slates got last week with Watson being optimal at 14 points. A lot more talent at quarterback tonight. Puka, I think from a cash perspective, is don't overthink it. Put Puka in your cash lineup type of play.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. At 6,400, he's too cheap. I mean, look at the Showdown slate. He's 10K over there, and obviously the pricing dynamics are much different. But at 10K over there, he's $1,600 more expensive than T. Higgins. He's $1,400 more expensive than Joe Mixon. It's just a kind of a different pricing dynamic over there. I think on this 2-game slate, they just left him too cheap.
Yep. Tutu, I mentioned briefly, really solid start for him as well. Little guy. I know people had always, we always had a solid projection in the last couple of years. He seems to be hitting those projections this year and exceeding them. Very clear number 2 here as far as interest, Matthew Stafford interest. I don't have their routes run stuff in front of me. I don't know if you do from a Van Jefferson perspective, but he's been kind of just total dust. So it's been the 2-2 show. Are you bumping up Tutu in non-Puka lineups, and any interest in anyone else on the Rams here?
Yeah, I actually think that's not something that I'd consider, and I'm glad you brought it up because I think that is an interesting way to get your exposure to Tutu. I think it's tough for both of them to go off in the same lineup and really provide slate-winning type scores in a lineup together. I know they're not super expensive, but I think at a combined price tag of 11.4, if they both give you slate-winning type scores, it's probably because Matthew Stafford's in that lineup and because Matthew Stafford had a really good day. So I think bumping Tutu in non-Puka lineups is good. It's probably a way to get a little bit more exposure than you naturally would, and docking him in lineups where Puka appears is a way to kind of limit them appearing together. I think at 37% owned, though, I just feel like he's a little bit overpriced, a little bit overowned for my blood. And I know Van Jefferson has been total dust. It's tough to disagree with that. But you're getting an $1,100 discount, and you're getting paid off with half or a third of the ownership projection on the Rams wide receiver 3. And you're right, it's been ugly. He's been out there for a ton of routes, still 86% route participation through 2 games, but only an 11% target share. A lot of those targets are coming deep downfield. He had an 11.2 yard ADOT in week 1, 20.3 yard ADOT in week 2. It's one of those things like where if he connects, he could pay off that $3,900 price tag in just a couple of receptions, just a single reception even. I think at 14.3% and 3,900, he's a little bit under-owned relative to how frequently I think he ends up in a winning lineup. So I actually don't mind King Dust himself, Van Jefferson, on this slate.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great way to put it, right? It's so easy for us to just kind of look at results, look at the first couple of weeks and say, man, screw this guy. But 3,900, he's out there running deep routes. I think that's totally fair for sure. All right, let's talk the early game. We'll go to Philadelphia first. What do you feel? This more an A.J. Brown game or Devonta Smith? Because they are nearly identical salary, very similar projection, very similar ownership. So how do you break these two guys down? Because I never know how to do it properly.
It's so hard, and DraftKings always seems to do this to us, specifically on Showdown slates, where they'll be like separated by $200. They inevitably end up projecting for roughly the same amount of DraftKings points. You can see it there on the screen: 16.4 for A.J. Brown, 16.0 for Devontae Smith. And of course, because of all those factors, they end up projecting for roughly the same ownership as well. You see, we have a little bit higher ceiling on AJ Brown, a little bit more ownership on AJ Brown. I think that's mostly right. And I'm going to buy into this narrative tonight, that squeaky wheel narrative. Evan talked about it in his matchups column. You saw it if you watched the game last weekend. He's kind of chirping at Jalen Hurts, kind of chirping at Nick Sirianni. I don't think anything, no animosity, no Michael Carter yelling at the Jets running back coach type stuff. But this is looks to me like a situation where they could try and get AJ Brown some design targets early and often in this game. And we saw one of those big plays come back on a holding penalty for AJ Brown last week. I think they really want to get him going. It was kind of the Devonta Smith show last weekend. I prefer, if forced to choose, AJ Brown and kind of by quite a bit, but understand that that's a little bit narrative based.
I'm with you, actually. Yeah, I think squeaky wheel for sure. Also, if it is raining, like kind of that middle of the field might be a little bit more acceptable or achievable than kind of the downfield shots for Devonta. I know AJ has that in his bag too, but when he wants to be more of a possession receiver, they can play it that way. So anyway, I agree with you. Both guys seem really good. If you want to pair them both up with Jalen Hurts, I don't know if you have the money to do it without getting some real ugliness in that lineup, but I'm sure the field will not be doing that very much because of how expensive that would be. I don't love it personally. It's not my favorite, but Quez Watkins hurt behind them. Looks like Olamide Zaccheaus. I think I said it right. Something like that. We'll be running the wide receiver 3 routes tonight. Small projection there. Any interest on him or as a punt?
Yeah, I mean, small projection, but he's the stone minimum at the wide receiver position. We've already talked about how we need to find ways to not only get different, but find ways to save money on this slate. You're seeing sub 1% projected ownership. I think just as the fact that he's the stone min, the fact that he's going to slide in as the Eagles wide receiver 3. He's not going to be a high target share guy. Quez Watkins, even ahead of him, was not a high target share guy by any stretch. But this could be a spot where a couple of receptions or one long reception, or if he happens to fall into the end zone, could be enough to get you into a winning lineup. Another guy where, as we talked about with running back spots, I think 5 to 10% total exposure across a 150 set, 2 lineups out of 20 and a 20 max set, something like that is where I would go with Olamide Zaccheaus. If you're playing him with Hurts, obviously that correlates well too. Like where if you've already got AJ Brown in the lineup, you've got Hurts at quarterback. I don't think playing Olamide Zaccheaus in those lineups is bad by any stretch, because you're kind of hoping that Hurts does quite a bit with his arm. So I like that, playing those guys together. And, like I said, 5 to 10% in an MME set seems acceptable to me.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. He seems to be way ahead of Britton Covey here. And if they're really running out for healthy receivers, I think he's definitely an interesting play tonight. Oh, I don't mean to go tight yet. Tampa Bay side, definitely been the Mike Evans show with the connection with Baker so far. And mentioned kind of the narrative stuff with Bradbury maybe going inside. Maybe it opens up some more Evans stuff here tonight. Less ownership looks like right now than Godwin. I guess it's at that $600. We're waiting on a big Godwin game. Trey Palmer seems to be running as the clear wide receiver 3. He looks solid as well, but Evans is my guy here for sure. I like the start to his season with Baker. Not to dismiss Chris Godwin. Obviously, he's a talented player in his own right, but Evans' big playability has been great.
Yeah, I love Evans. Agree with Evan kind of in his matchups column. He's second in the NFL in yards per route run, 4th in air yard share, team high 12.9 yard ADOT. Of course, he's had 2 very, very, very soft matchups against the Bears secondary that can't stop anybody, and the Vikings secondary that also cannot stop anybody. But, I think for the most part, a lot of that's going to continue. You mentioned that maybe Bradbury is going to try and shadow Chris Godwin in this matchup. I think all signs just kind of point to Mike Evans ahead of his teammate. The $600 discount from Evans to Godwin is why you're seeing that ownership projection flipped the way that it is. For me, I prefer to find the $600 to get up to Evans, where I think he might end up being a little bit lower owned. And you can start to see it. All of these players priced in that 6K range look attractive. You have Puka, you have Mike Evans, you have T. Higgins, you have Joe Mixon. I don't really think ownership on any particular one of them is going to get out of hand. And because you need some of the salary relief, you're going to see some of these 5K guys like Chris Godwin, like Rachaad White, like Tutu Atwell. You're going to see some of those guys get steamed up because you need that salary relief on this slate. So I'm not too worried about ownership here, and I do agree with you. I love Big Mike Evans tonight.
Yeah, and I think Godwin's fine at ownership too. Squeaky, a little bit of squeaky wheel narrative on him as
Yeah.
well. Only 10 DraftKings points exactly, I believe, in the first 2 games. Palmer would be the guy I take shots on over Tompkins for me. But they're still dart throwy. A lot of targets condensing to those two. Let's talk about tight end as a whole here. Some interesting names. Dallas Goedert definitely leading the way from a projection standpoint by quite a bit. Almost 3 points higher than Tyler Higbee there. Eagles passing offense seems to be the one to invest in. He's cheap enough where he could become an interesting double with either Smith or Brown as well. Ownership seems fine. How do you like Goddard tonight? And then we'll kind of talk about the rest of the position as a whole.
Yeah, I like Goddard. I think he's efficiently owned. Would like to boost Goddard in lineups that have Jalen Hurts at quarterback. Of course, you have that really positive correlation there where like Goddard's mostly going to get there on touchdown receptions, and think that's probably the best way to play those two together. But I do think at 36.1% at 4,800 on the salary, I think he's pretty efficiently owned. The ones that are really interesting to me are the cheap guys, and it's pretty ugly. It's super unattractive, but we have Irv Smith doubtful. We're expecting him not to play. That kind of throws Drew Sample into what will be like an every down role. And you're not really banking on Drew Sample going out there and being Irv Smith or really even anything close to that. Not that that's been a super attractive role to start the season, but what you need from Drew Sample is to just not get beat by Dallas Goedert and Tyler Higbee by too much, and that's not, as long as Dallas Goedert doesn't completely nuke the slate, which is certainly possible from the tight end position. Like Higbee isn't that attractive. His usage profile has been really ugly to start the season, kind of a catch and fall down guy at this point of his career, really low ADOT, not a huge target share with Puka there. So you're really kind of not getting a ton from Higbee unless he falls into the end zone. Cade Otton is somewhat interesting, but look, 40% ownership on Cade Otton at 3K. I know the Eagles have been beat up by opposing tight ends. Those tight ends were, I think, a little bit better than Cade Otton and TJ Hawkinson and Hunter Henry, but I know they can be beat through the middle of the field. It looks to me like that's already accounted for in that ownership at slate high 39.3%. So for me, I think I'm going to have a handful of teams where I'm probably just punting it off and really hoping that this position does not kill me. Like if Goddard scores 8 and Sample gives me 3, I'm hoping that the salary savings there or something like that will allow me to get the other pieces that I need to fit into a lineup, and that my construction overall is what gets me past the finish line versus not having the raw production from the tight end spot.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's a reasonable gamble. Like, tight end's been a disaster for the most part so far this year. And Higbee, who's a guy we were excited about going into the year, just kind of from a target perspective, completely iced now by Puka. And you mentioned his role going down. So, at ownership, 24% ownership, I would take a shot as kind of a squeaky wheel thing with him as well. But 4,400, you're only getting $400 discount on Goddard, who has a clearly higher ceiling. So to me, it's Sample and Otton are my two most interesting guys, but then Otton, the ownership. So yeah, I think kind of as you, deduce your outcomes a little bit more, Sample seems to be the guy that probably makes the most sense in a lot of different constructions. Alan mentioning Bengals could use more 4 wide receivers with Trent Irwin. Yeah, maybe. And if 150, if you want to kind of throw a dart there, I don't hate that. But, they were kind of giving Sample a role even when Irv Smith was healthy, and they were kind of going tight end by committee. So I expect Sample's snap share to go up even more in a role that he kind of already had. So I think that's pretty good. Let's talk defenses here. Obviously incredibly random ownership. Condensing a little bit around Cincinnati, it seems like at 35%. Bucs seem to be the one that have fallen through the cracks, and also your cheapest one. Any defensive thoughts here?
Yeah, I was just looking at the sim results here. It looked to me like the Bengals are probably the most over-owned, part of that being, at 3K against Matthew Stafford, who's mistake prone, against an offensive line that hasn't been great through 2 weeks. Looks like they're probably going to be the most owned. If you want to take the opposite end of kind of the bet that I'm making on this Bengals offense tonight and say that Joe Burrow is going to struggle to evade sacks, Joe Burrow is going to struggle to play and throw, there's a possibility that he takes more hits in the backfield at 2,800 and 20.3% projected ownership. I think the Rams are okay and a pretty interesting defense. And then, yeah, the Bucs, I mean, it's going to be tough for the field to get there against Jalen Hurts, but $2,600, you save quite a bit. And that, $200, $400, $700 is going to be meaningful on this slate, and 17.1% ownership. I think if anything, that probably comes down. I don't think it's wrong to play the Bucs defense. You think you can even play the Bucs defense against Jalen Hurts? Maybe they force him to drop back a little bit more. Maybe you get a few more mistakes from him, although he's going to be very good at avoiding sacks and doesn't usually force a ton of turnovers. I don't mind the Buccaneers defense at a slate low 2,600 and slate low 17.1% ownership.
Yeah, you certainly can. I wouldn't make too many rules with defense. Maybe max. I think last week we saw 3 Browns against the Steelers who were optimal. Maybe max 3 or 4 offensive players against the defense. But I would leave your rules pretty open there on a 2-game slate. Okay, if anyone has any questions on the 2-gamer, feel free. Cody, if you're game for it, if you want to quickly hit on the Showdown main slate tonight with the Rams Bengals. Obviously, we've been talking about all these guys, so you kind of know our thoughts, but any macro stuff that you have here for Bengals Rams, and we'll take any questions over the next 5-ish minutes or so.
Yeah, macro stuff on this slate. You're still going to see, even though we've talked about how much we like Puka, how much we like Khyren, you can build a bull case for Tutu. You could build a bull case for Van Jefferson at a reduced price tag and a high ADOT type thing. Like as much as we can say we like these guys, the field is still showing us that they're going to be very, very, very Bengals heavy tonight. A lot of that's because of some of the Drew Sample value that opened up. You have Tyler Boyd value as well. But I think because you have T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow up at the top, you have Joe Mixon, who is underpriced. You're going to see a ton of 4-2 Bengals heavy lineups on this slate. And if you want to kind of play the opposite narrative that I've discussed on this slate, you're going to get paid off with really low ownership on the Rams heavy stuff. Maybe a Matthew Stafford double, maybe Puka, Khyren, Matthew Stafford plus somebody else. You're going to get pretty low ownership there. So I think that's an interesting way to play it on the Showdown slate. From a captain perspective, ownership looks like it's going to be fairly spread out amongst the top 4 options that we've discussed that we like the most. I think of kind of the big 4 or 5, if you want to throw Khyren in that mix, he will be the lowest owned of the skill position captain options. So I do like that a little bit and just kind of banking on that role. But, because you have so many guys that you can play and the field wants to play, you're not going to see this 20 to 25% type captain ownership that we see on some slates with just a few studs. You've got Puka and Jamar Chase and Joe Mixon and T. Higgins and Khyren Williams. And at the respective price tags, the field's super excited about playing all these guys.
Yeah. The quarterback captain ownership seems low here tonight. And obviously that's going to happen when you have some really exciting skill position guys, and the questions surrounding Burrow's health, but it's a way to possibly get different. Cody, you might know more than me as far as kind of the way things are inputting into projections regarding Burrow's health, but just based on the numbers, I would imagine that we are baking in a less than 100% Joe Burrow here.
Less than 100%. I think from the time that I wrote the article last night to this morning, his projection had dropped by roughly a point, 1 DraftKings point. I know that just kind of poking my head into the projection team channel in our internal Slack group, we are kind of lowering his yards per attempt expectation. We're increasing his sack rate. And those are all kind of things that I discussed throughout the show. Maybe just a lack of our faith in his ability to plant and throw, a lack of our faith in his ability to evade sacks, and just being less than 100%, frankly. So yes, we are baking that in some. Are we baking it in enough? I don't know. It's a little bit scary. If he plays to his median expectation that we're looking at on this slate, I think he's a great play. If he looks like he did in the first 2 weeks, it's less than a great play. So you're kind of, you're getting paid off with the ownership discount, of course, but you're taking some risks on Burrow being a little bit more healthy than we've seen.
Yep, for sure. Matthew asks, any Bucs cheap wide receivers viable? I think Trey Palmer is interesting in large field and 150 sets. I believe in the talent.
Absolutely. I agree.
The third guy.
And this goes back to that get comfortable being uncomfortable type thing. You have a couple of 3K options on the slate, or roughly 3K options on the slate with like Trey Palmer, Van Jefferson, Olamide Zaccheaus. At least Trey Palmer is running a route on like 40% of dropbacks. I think he can play a little bit. You're looking at like a 6 to 8 to 10% target share. He's seen a few deep targets. There's certainly worse you can do, but just know that like the median expectation is close to 0.
Yep. Coach asking if Cincinnati can go over 50 points. So I think it's like a 43 over under. So take that for what you will. I mean, I think it's within the range of outcomes. If Burrow is healthy, I feel pretty good about its chance of going over the 43. But Vegas is Vegas for a reason. All right. We have anything else here, Cody? I know we just did a quick touch on, but obviously read Cody's Showdown article. He does a great job every week, per usual, breaking down all the stuff you need to know for the Showdown slate. Yeah, fun one tonight. I'm excited for another 2-gamer. I think this is the last one till like the Thanksgiving-ish time when we have small slates to break down for you all. Appreciate you all tuning in. Wish you the best of luck. Hope that week 3 has been a successful one for you so far, as it has been for so many of us at ETR, and hope that we finish out strong here tonight.
Wait. Before you finish the show, flag plans.
Yeah. Oh, fuck. Sorry.
I know you're fasting. I know you're fasting. I know that.
I'm a complete mess. Go ahead, Cody. Who do you like as your flag plan tonight? We're gonna go with the 2-gamer, obviously, for that.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't let you get out of here without giving a flag plan and without letting me give a flag plan, because usually it's some dusty, 3K showdown wide receiver who has a 25-yard ADOT and is very likely to catch 0 passes. You know what? I'm gonna take some liberties with this flag plan, and it's gonna be the most expensive wide receiver, maybe the most expensive skill position player on the entire slate. But because of that, because of the issues with Joe Burrow's calf, because of the public's perception on this offense through 2 weeks, I think there's a little bit of a small sample overreaction here. Ja'Marr Chase is finding his way into the optimal lineup. I won't hear anything other than that. At 39.3% projected ownership right now, I think he's way too underplayed for how often he ends up in a winning lineup. And I'm going to be way over the field on Ja'Marr Chase. I think he just puts his thing on the field tonight, and we get an alpha Ja'Marr Chase game, and Joe Burrow carries him there.
Yeah, we are certainly in agreement on that one. Love me some Ja'Marr Chase tonight. For yours truly, man, it's a tough one. Am I still on the 2-gamer? Yeah, it's a tough one. I think Chase is my favorite play by a wide margin. I think some stuff in that Bucs pass game is interesting. I think no matter kind of how you shake out that outlook of that game, and there's a chance that it just falls flat on its face. And you mentioned kind of the bear case on Baker, but with the Bucs still having some offensive line issues, plus the Eagles front seven, like there's a chance that they just can't move the ball. But I do think kind of no matter how you look at game script there, they will get some stuff done through the air. And I usually don't love to bank on the back-to-back huge performances, but I'm really liking what I'm seeing out of Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield so far this season. So I'm going to go in that Mike Evans route, who's, $600 more is keeping him with a little bit less ownership than Chris Godwin, less ownership than Ja'Marr, similar ownership to T. Higgins, less ownership than Puka. So when you kind of paint it from a slate context perspective, I kind of like where he sits on this slate. So give me Mike Evans as a strong bring back to any Philly stuff. My top stack option with Baker, or a fine one-off play as well. So we get you 2 alpha receivers there for you for your flags tonight. All right, now that will do it. We will be back on Thursday. Who's playing Thursday night, Cody? Do we know?
I haven't even looked.
Detroit, Green Bay. I will be in Napa Valley on the road, but you will still have me. I'll be there. Detroit, Green Bay for Thursday night. That should be a fun one. Been a fun start for both of those teams so far. And so we'll be back for you then. Wish you again a great end of week 3 here tonight. If your teams are playing, I wish you the best of luck, unless you're an Eagles fan. And I hope you all have a very successful week 3 going into week 4. Take care, everybody.